Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another installment of the Devolution Recap Series. Very excited about this one today. We are doing part 12, which is called Playbook, and this gets into the Color Revolution and the Color Revolution Playbook and Norm Eisen and the Transition Integrity Project and their little game scenario that they put together. This should be a fun one, and I think we're going to be able to relate this to a lot of what's currently taking place today. So, but a couple things real quick. Number one, if you could all do me a favor, hit that thumbs up. Always appreciate that. Number two, I was going to go on locals today after the stream, but Patrick is going to be reading the latest article from Joe Lange's at 3 Eastern. And I want you guys all to make sure you tune into that. I don't know if the link is posted yet. Let me see here. Okay, it's not posted yet, but it'll be in the process of being posted here during the show, and it'll get up. Just to let you know what Patrick said about it this morning, because I haven't read this one yet. Joe Lange is obviously a fantastic writer, puts all his stuff on the Badlands Substack. But he says, hold on. I think his last column literally proved Q is 100% real and 99.9% has already won. That was his review of this. So should be very interesting. I'm looking forward to listening to it, but that's why we're going to cut out without doing a little locals chat afterwards. This article, go to devolution.link, part 12. I believe it's about an hour and 10 minutes of reading. We're going to speed it up a little bit, and I imagine I'm going to have quite a bit of commentary on this one. We'll see, maybe not, but yeah, we'll get right to it. But before we do, I want to get a quick word from the sponsor of today's stream, which are good friend Jeff Pedigo and City Zoo. City Zoo, an unfairy story by Jeff Pedigo, Captain Seth Keshel's reclusive map guy. Most of you probably follow Seth Keshel, you should know who he is. City Zoo is an allegorical fable like George Orwell's Animal Farm, but instead of being a fable about the Russian Revolution, it's an allegory about the color revolution now underway in the United States. But City Zoo is less about politics than it is about the unique culture of the United States and the way our news media has been monkeying with it. Badlands basically exists because of what City Zoo write about. So, City Zoo presents an animalized history of the USA and its unique culture, but when a suspiciously Trumpian elephant called Gus decides for run for animal zookeeper, the news media made of shrieking, dung-throwing monkeys go apeshit. And this one is very relevant to part 12, like City Zoo, talking about the color revolution here in America. The metaphors that he uses in this book is just phenomenal, guys. I know I've been talking about this a lot. I absolutely love this book. I've been reading through it more and more. My kids like to hear parts of it. It's fantastic. I highly encourage you guys to go to badlandsmedia.tv/cityzoo. Not only would you be getting a great book, but you'll be supporting somebody that's part of our community. Support those who support us. You know what I mean? And you can also help somebody from our community get to the top 10 of Amazon. He's right there. I think he's number 60 in the literary fiction section. I would love to get him to top 10. The hardcover is sold out. The ebook is available. More hardcovers are on the way. But anyway, badlandsmedia.tv/cityzoo. Check it out. You will not be disappointed. All right, guys, we'll get right to Patrick's reading of this, and I'm going to speed it up to 1.25 and enjoy. I'll be popping in with commentary as we go.
Time. Devolution, part 12, by Patel Patriot. Let us begin.
I do remember Patrick was like, I think this is the reading where he's a little heated because he tried recording this a couple times. Like he recorded one and then it got broken. The stream got broken. And so then he recorded the second part of it. And it was like two things. And he was like, so he did one full reread again. And it was, if I remember right, this is the one he was pretty heated about.
Playbook, Devolution, part 12. If you haven't read the previous installments of the Devolution series, here they are. If you have any questions or would just like to engage in some Devolution talk, feel free to email me or join my Telegram and ask away. t.me/PatelPatriot. Don't forget to subscribe. Special thank you to AC Harmony for her dedication and contributions, and also a special thank you to Catherine D for leading me down this rabbit hole. We begin. In my previous articles, I have discussed the larger battle ongoing between Donald Trump and the political establishment. The swamp, the deep state, whatever you want to call this enemy, we know they are entrenched throughout all of our major institutions. They did everything they could to prevent Trump from being elected in 2016 and blatantly stole an election in 2020. Just how deep does the swamp go? I intend to figure that out to the best of my abilities. This article is going to be the first of at least 2 articles solely focused on the so-called deep state and the tactics they have used throughout Trump's presidency, which culminated in the theft of the 2020 election. Everything from the Russia hoax to installing Biden as president is connected.
So one of the things I say here, like this is going to be a part of a 2-part series where I go through like the deep state. My original plan here, and I think I still have the draft of the article in my Substack drafts, as I was like going through like kind of mapping out the deep state. It was a crazy stupid task, like crazy big. No way I was actually gonna be able to do it. A lot of it would have been speculation anyway. But it was towards the end of this article that I ended up coming across. I mean, I didn't come across it again. I came across it like for the 3rd time, Executive Order 13961, and it finally clicked for me how important that was. And so instead of it being a 2-part series, it ended up being one of the most important executive orders we had right after this article. But yeah, this is a very interesting article in terms of the color revolution, and we get a glimpse of how the deep state operates. And I think this is going to be very relevant and topical for what we're going through today, 2024, even the last 4 years.
The playbook. The focus of this article is going to be all about providing the proper context that we will need for Devolution Part 13. It's incredibly important to understand who the political establishment is and their history of manipulating the political landscape to their benefit. The 2020 United States election wasn't the first time the political establishment ousted a leader they didn't want or couldn't control. Having only followed politics since 2018, what I'll be covering in this article was new information to me, but may not be new to those reading. Either way, it's important to better understand this topic before we move forward. Let's talk about color revolutions, how the political establishment has mastered them, and how they used their color revolution playbook domestically during Trump's presidency. What is the definition and purpose of a color revolution? From syncreticstudies.com, quote, "Color revolutions are one of the newest models of state destabilization. They allow external actors to plead plausible deniability when accused of illegally interfering in the domestic affairs of a sovereign state, and their mass mobilization of people power renders them highly effective in the eyes of the global media. Additionally, the conglomeration of large numbers of civilians protesting the government also increases pressure on that said government and limits its options in effectively dealing with the ongoing destabilization. All color revolutions closely follow the same template, and understanding the nature of this applied tactic of destabilization will allow states to craft suitable countermeasures against it," end quote. As we go further, you'll see exactly what is meant by state destabilization. But the biggest takeaway here is knowing all color revolutions closely follow the same template. We will be closely examining that template shortly, but first we need to discuss the ideology behind color revolutions.
You know, one thing I think that I'd like you guys to kind of keep in mind as we go through this is that most of the time color revolutions, at least the way we're going to discuss here, they're not organic. Like they're run by our CIA, our State Department. They do this all over the world. They do regime changes, and they do them to change the regime to get favorable leaders in there so they can enrich themselves. This is what they do in Ukraine. I mean, all over the world. What we see happening here in the United States and what Trump has done, I think, is flip this around on them. Like he's performing his own kind of color revolution, but this one feels more organic. You know what I mean? Like, and this is when we look forward to 2024 and the potentials of what might happen. Like, are they going to steal it? Or that, who knows? But if they do, and some sort of protests that could take place because people would be pissed off from the preventing Trump from taking office again or trying to, I feel like that would be totally organic. Where if you remember back in February of 2021, that this article came out, The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. And there's a part in here, right here. The group's now defunct website had a map listing 400 planned post-election demonstrations to be activated via text message as soon as November 4th to stop the coup they feared. The left was ready to flood the streets. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's not organic. It's paid protesters all over the country. They're doing it all throughout the summer of love 2020, and they had people ready to do it again in case Trump actually won the election. But this time, I think it's been kind of flipped on its head.
From syncreticstudies.com, quote, ideology is the central focus of any change within the world, and it is the guiding idea that motivates all of the other factors affecting a color revolution. Without ideology, everything that follows is empty and devoid of meaning and purpose. The traditional ideology motivating all color revolutions is liberal democracy, and it seeks to, quote unquote, free targeted states from perceived anti-liberal, democratic, non-Western governments. Liberal democracy, in its current postmodern manifestation, is expansionist and aggressive. It is not content with alternative ideological and value systems and must steamroll over them in its pursuit of global dominance. Besides waging direct war against societies resisting its advance, i.e. Serbia, Libya, liberal democratic states, the West, have learned to pursue other methods of defeating targeted states. These methods are less direct than outright war, but no less efficient. The ideological penetration of a society eventually embodies itself in a physical outburst outside the state itself, guided by a segment of the state's own citizenry. The state, and society as a whole, must combat a part of itself that is rising up against the status quo, leading to a conflict of interest and a social civil war. Depending upon the level of provocation that the pro-liberal democratic protesters initiate, as well as instances of mismanagement by the state in dealing with this social uprising, the social civil war may eventually turn violent and briefly resemble an actual civil war. This is especially so if the protesters have been armed by forces outside of the country, and if they decide to attack the security services tasked with dispersing the color revolution's physical manifestations. End quote. Some major statements are made.
Okay, so everything we just went through there it's sticking out to me. What they're talking about here with these color revolutions, it's an ideological overthrow, essentially, ideological penetration. I don't know why that word's so hard for me to say this morning. It's not even morning; it's afternoon. But it's a battle for the mind. They're talking about irregular warfare. That sounds very much to me like our definition of irregular warfare that we get to in part 22. And if you've been following the series, irregular warfare is so key to a lot of the moves that Trump made. And if you're new to the series, we'll get to this later on. But irregular warfare is huge. It's part of the color revolution playbook. That's what they're talking about here. And I think of Chris Miller and his definition, and I might even have it saved up here. Let me see if I have it in my videos on the side. Maybe I don't. Might have pulled it out. Yeah, it's not in there, but it's a battle for the mind, right? It's like it's a battle for the hearts and minds of the population. People are at the center of irregular warfare. That's same thing with color revolutions.
In the above screenshot, quote, it is not content with alternative ideological and value systems and must steamroll over them in its pursuit of global dominance. Doesn't that sound exactly like what the Democratic Party has been doing to conservatives for years? Quote, the state and society as a whole must combat a part of itself that is rising up against the status quo, leading to a conflict of interest and a social civil war. End quote. Think back to the summer of 2020 and all the violent protesters. Can you think of any instances of mismanagement by the state in dealing with the protests? How many blue state governors did almost nothing to shut down the protests? Was it done on purpose to follow the color revolution playbook? From Syncretic Studies, quote, ideology is thus the initiator of all color revolutions. It presents an opposite form of development for a domestic society, and it motivates sympathetic segments of the population to engage in tangible demonstrations to demand change. It will later be seen that the vast majority of these active protesters may not even be aware that their activities are being orchestrated by a higher power, NGO, foreign government. Rather, most of them, as a result of heavy-handed information campaign promoting the destabilizing ideology, have truly been led to believe that their actions are spontaneous and natural, and that they represent the inevitable progress that all areas of the world are bound to experience sooner or later. The ideology of the individual over the collective, the social aspect of liberal democracy, empowers each and every protester to feel that they are making a unique and significant impact in bringing about this change. end quote. Now that we have a basic understanding of what a color revolution is, we will need to go a bit deeper. Revolver News has put out a series of 3 well-researched articles on the topic. Each one is fascinating and worth the full read, but I will be breaking down the main points below. First, exclusive: the curious case of George Kent, State Department's Belarus color revolution expert and never Trump impeachment witness. Second, Transition Integrity Project. Is this Soros-linked group plotting a color revolution against President Trump? Third, meet Norm Eisen, legal hatchet man and central operative in the color revolution against President Trump. These articles help outline how our United States government has been using color revolutions over the years to implement regime changes without having to use an actual military coup. Instead, they use street protests, disputed elections, and a favorable media. When you read through these articles, you'll notice that some familiar names start popping up. These people, considered to be color revolution experts, are the same people who were involved in trying to take down Trump during his first impeachment. George Kent, deputy chief of mission to Ukraine under Obama during the Orange Revolution, witness against Trump during first impeachment, color revolution expert. Victoria Nuland.
Victoria Nuland is freaking everywhere. She's the worst.
Current Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs for Joe Biden, Obama's Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs during Orange Revolution, witness against Trump during first impeachment. Norm Eisen, law school classmate of Barack Obama, Obama's ambassador to the Czech Republic and White House Special Counsel for Ethics and Government Reform, co-counsel against Donald Trump during first impeachment, author of a color revolution regime change manual entitled The Playbook, participant in the Transition Integrity Project.
I always forget that Norm Eisen was actually a law school classmate of Barack Obama. That's insane. And to see the stuff he's done, like he's basically written the legal framework for all of the stuff that they've thrown against Trump since he's been out of office, quote unquote.
Norm Eisen is of particular interest. Here is a small sample of what Revolver News had to say. Quote, as the man who implemented the David Brock blueprint for suing the president into paralysis and his allies into bankruptcy, who helped mainstream and amplify the Russia hoax, who drafted 10 articles of impeachment for the Democrats a full month before President Trump ever called the Ukraine president in 2018, who personally served as special counsel litigating the Ukraine impeachment, who created a template for internet censorship of world leaders and a handbook for mass mobilizing racial justice protesters to overturn democratic election results. There is perhaps no man alive with a more decorated resume for plots against President Trump. Indeed, the story of Norm Eisen, a key architect of nearly every attempt to delegitimize, impeach, censor, sue, and remove the democratically elected 45th president of the United States, is a tale that winds through nearly every facet of the color revolution playbook. There is no purer embodiment of Revolver's thesis that the very same regime change professionals who run color revolutions on behalf of the US government in order to undermine or overthrow alleged authoritarian governments overseas are running the very same playbook to overturn Trump's 2016 victory and to preempt a repeat in 2020. To put it simply, what you see is not just the same color revolution playbook run against Trump, but the same people using it against Trump who have employed it in a professional capacity against targets overseas. Same people, same playbook. In Norm Eisen's case, the same people, same playbook refrain takes an arrestingly literal turn when one realizes that Norm Eisen wrote a classic color revolution regime change manual and conveniently titled it The Playbook. End quote. Now, before we get too far, we need to reflect on something from that last screenshot. The very same regime change professionals who run color revolutions on behalf of the US government in order to undermine or overthrow alleged authoritarian governments overseas are running the very same playbook to overturn Trump's 2016 victory and to preempt a repeat in 2020. I'd like to provide some information to substantiate that statement. Let's look at the criteria needed for a successful color revolution from e-ir.info and compare it to Donald Trump's presidency. Let's break it down. From the above.
This is so spot on, guys. So spot on.
Article 1. The incumbent leader of the regimes must be very unpopular and face the so-called lame duck syndrome. Even though it was never true, the political establishment started to build this narrative before Trump even entered office. From Politico, quote, President-elect Donald Trump will descend on Washington next month, buoyed by his upset victory and Republican control of Congress to implement his agenda. But he's facing a major obstacle. Trump will enter the White House as the least popular incoming president in the modern era of public opinion polling. On election day, just 38% of voters had a favorable opinion of Trump compared to 60% who viewed him unfavorably. Unheard of for a presidential election victor. Still, Trump won about 15% of the vote among those who had an unfavorable opinion of him. Trump's persistent and deep unpopularity, combined with the fact that he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by nearly 3 million ballots, means he lacks the potent argument that the will of the people are behind his agenda. Quote, he's clearly not doing as well as other presidents-elect, said GOP pollster David Winston, a longtime advisor to Republican leaders in both House and Senate. We've never had a president-elect that had more unfavorables than favorables. He started in a pretty big hole in terms of favorables, end quote. This narrative was created from the get-go, and the authors of it never relented throughout Trump's first term. Poll after poll, one fake news story after the next, all used to create a narrative that Trump was very unpopular. The first criteria needed for a successful color revolution is met.
And this is like an understatement. I mean, everything they did from before he even took office was to delegitimize him and make him unpopular. And even though he wasn't that unpopular, as unpopular as they were saying, they portrayed him as he was, as if he was, as everybody hated him, the polls, all this stuff. I mean, this definitely checks that box.
2. The anti-regime forces are enforced by mass media and foreign influence. Here is how International Relations explained it. Quote, the second criterion is that the anti-regime forces are enforced by mass media and foreign influences. This and the next paragraph will mainly focus on the Orange Revolution, although it will still bring out some examples from the Rose Revolution to illustrate how foreign influences, such as NGOs or foreign ambassadors and the mass media, play an important role in shaping the success of color revolutions. Starting with the Orange Revolution, it is found that civil society flourished in the Ukrainian society and also in Kyrgyzstan. This provided a good opportunity for donor support from the United States, European governments, the National Endowment for Democracy, and private philanthropists, such as George Soros. In fact, the anti-regime movement in Ukraine was funded and organized by the U.S. government, according to The Guardian. They claimed that the Democratic Party's National Democratic Institute, the Republican Party's International Republican Institute, the U.S. State Department, and the U.S. Aid are the main agencies involved in grassroots campaigns launched by the young activists in Ukraine, as well as the Freedom House NGO and billionaire George Soros' Open Society Institute. Officially, the U.S. government spent $14 million in organizing and funding the operation of anti-regime movements. In addition, Freedom House and the Democratic Party's NDI helped fund and organize the, quote, largest civil regional monitoring effort in Ukraine, where they sent in 1,000 trained observers and organized exit polls. It is very important in organizing the exit polls because they seize the initiative in the propaganda battle with the regime and put the onus on the authorities to respond. While in Georgia, the U.S. ambassador during the Rose Revolution played an important role in coaching Mikhail Saakashvili in how to bring down Eduard Shevardnadze.
Just to highlight the importance of these exit polls and shaping the narrative, 2020, they called the election in Arizona before voting even closed. And they said the exit polls show us that we can safely call Arizona. They had no business doing that, but it was part of that narrative. And Fox News was definitely assisting in the takedown of Trump in this color revolution.
Besides foreign influences, the mass media also plays an important role to further stimulate anti-regime forces. During the Orange Revolution, despite the government's nearly total control of political content on national television, they also put pressure on independent media. Some objective newspapers and local radio stations continued to function. Moreover, journalists, also bristling at government control and censorship, launched strikes and public protests, demanding the right to tell voters the truth in the days before the Orange Revolution. End quote. How much money has George Soros pumped into liberal organizations over the years? How many lies and fake news stories have the media pushed on us during Trump's first term? The second criterion needed for a successful color revolution is met.
Again, another understatement. George Soros has invested so much money into the United States and overthrowing Donald Trump. And not just him. I mean, there's so much foreign money everywhere that gets pumped in there. And where's our money going? Our tax dollars going to Ukraine and coming right back in here to meddle in our elections. I mean, this is definitely met. The part that kind of stuck out to me there towards the end when they're talking about the media during the Orange Revolution, despite the government's nearly total control of political content on national television, they also put pressure on independent media. This is a little different. So when Trump, if we're thinking of color revolution with Trump in office, he didn't have control. The government didn't have control over, political content on national television. If anything, it was the opposite. He had no control. Like, they were all against him. The independent media was basically suppressed and then eventually taken off of social media altogether. The people at least speaking the truth. And so I would say they had a blanket coverage, the color revolution people, of media, news, propaganda, all that stuff. And despite all that, Trump still won that election and they stole it from him. So, I mean, this criteria is met. I don't think they were successful in every aspect of the color revolution.
3. The revolution must not be ideological. It must be for the sake of better national integration, freedom, democracy, and economic development. How many times did the Democrats say that Trump is a threat to our democracy, that he was a dictator, that removing him from office was needed for the sake of saving America? The third criterion needed for a successful color revolution is met.
And it's kind of funny. They're still playing with this one. Even though Trump is technically and publicly not in office, they are still calling him a dictator, a threat to our democracy. He must be eliminated, all these things. They're still running with that narrative. They never, it's met. They've been attempting it. They've never been fully successful in painting him as this to enough people.
4. The anti-regime forces should also be motivated by the grievances on the corrupted government, which is supported by a foreign state which the people do not desire. The last criterion mentioned in this article is that the anti-regime forces are also motivated by the grievances on the corrupted government, which is supported by a foreign state that the people do not desire. In this case, the foreign state that people do not desire refers to the Russian Federation. From 3 color revolutions, we can see that the overthrown leaders, such as Edward Shevardnadze, Yanukovych, and Akayev, are all Russian-supported leaders, end quote. Democrats and the media have been trying to paint Donald Trump as a Russian agent since before he took office. We're starting to see more evidence come out from Durham's investigation showing us just how big that conspiracy is. It's all part of the color revolution plan that the political establishment used against Trump. The 4th criterion needed for a successful color revolution is met.
And this last one's funny too, because in their typical color revolutions, especially over in Europe, that's what they do. They use it, like the anti-Russia propaganda stuff, to overthrow these leaders. Well, here they really didn't actually have that, so they had to fabricate it. They had to fabricate the Russia thing. They couldn't even come up with anything new. They had to use the same bad guy, boogeyman, and in order to finish that part of the criteria, if that makes sense. They had to fabricate the Russia connection in order to use that as to why Trump is a threat and must be overthrown and taken out.
Just the tip. One of the more interesting and sinister developments that took place in 2020 was creation of the Transition Integrity Project.
This is one of my favorite subheadings, by the way, just the tip. Just figured I'd throw that out there.
Tip. On August 3rd of 2020, the Transition Integrity Project released a report titled Preventing a Disrupted Presidential Election and Transition. This 22-page document outlined a series of 4 war game election night scenarios. Here is what Revolver News had to say about the Transition Integrity Project. Quote, so what is the Transition Integrity Project, and what does it have to do with the color revolution against Trump? Here is how friendly media outlets represent the Transition Integrity Project and its agenda. Quote within a quote. A bipartisan group of about 80 political operatives and academics has been involved in discussions about what could happen if President Donald Trump were to lose the November election and then contest the results, potentially refusing to leave the White House. The Boston Globe first reported on Sunday that the group of Democrats and Republicans, all of whom oppose the president, convened an online meeting to hash out scenarios as part of what has been called the Transition Integrity Project in June. Newsweek. Of course, what they do not say about this ostensibly bipartisan group is that its founder, Rosa Brooks, is a longtime close associate of George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. She served both as special counsel to the president at George Soros's Open Society Foundation and as a board member of the Open Society Foundation. Quote, in 2006 to 2007, Rosa Brooks was special counsel to the president at the Open Society Institute in New York. Brooks has also served as a consultant for Human Rights Watch. She currently serves on the advisory board of the Open Society Foundation's U.S. programs, the advisory board of National Security Action, and the board of the Harper's Magazine Foundation. Back to Patel. Participants got to choose whether their involvement would be publicly disclosed or not. So we don't have a full list, but Wikipedia listed some of the participants. Note that Revolver News also reported that Norm Eisen participated in the event from Wikipedia. The Transition Integrity Project was initially organized in late 2019 by Rosa Brooks, a law professor at Georgetown and former Pentagon senior official, and Niels Gilman, a former vice chancellor at the University of California, Berkeley, and historian at the Berggruen Institute. Other participants in the Transition Integrity Project's exercises included Michael Steele, former chair of the RNC, John Podesta, former White House chief of staff to former president of the United States Bill Clinton, Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, Trey Grayson, former secretary of state of Kentucky, Donna Brazile, former Democratic National Committee acting chair, William Kristol, journalist, Edward Luce, journalist, Max Boot, journalist, David Frum, journalist. Transition Integrity Project, TIP, was launched out of concern that the Trump administration may seek to manipulate, ignore, undermine, or disrupt the 2020 presidential election and transition process. Remember that they claim that the Transition Integrity Project is bipartisan. Back to Revolver News. Quote, media outlets such as the National Pulse have drawn attention to Rosa Brooks's Soros connections, as well as some interesting connections to Democrat presidential candidate Joe Biden. It is certainly suspicious that the head of a group claiming to be bipartisan, which runs war games that reinforce the dangerous new talking point that President Trump won't concede the election, just happens to be linked to George Soros and Joe Biden. To top it all off, Never Trump Russiagate fanatics Bill Kristol and David Frum participated in the study as well. In fact, the entire project appears to be a collaboration between establishment Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans. Shockingly, when anti-Trump Republicans pretended to be him in a simulation, they had him do a bunch of illegal and unconstitutional acts. Wow, what an incredibly revealing simulation. On the one hand, it is tempting to look at this as just another case of Democrat operatives falsely representing themselves as bipartisan and getting away with it due to a compliant media. There is, of course, some truth to this, but in a deeper sense, this interpretation misses the plot completely. The domestic color revolution framework hints at something far more dangerous and sinister. George Soros and his Open Society Foundation have played key roles in the color revolutions in Eastern Europe, including the famous Orange Revolution and Euromaidan Revolution in Ukraine, in which mass demonstrations and acts of civil disobedience were organized in order to overthrow the target regime helmed by Russia-aligned Yanukovych. Setting aside the question of whether the overthrow of Yanukovych was justified or in American interests, what is crucial here is the similarity not only in method, but even in vocabulary. Mass demonstrations are part of the color revolution playbook, especially when they can incite crackdowns that can be used as further pretext to escalate demonstrations against the target regime. Notice the vocabulary George Soros's Open Society Foundation used to describe the Euromaidan protests. From the Open Society, quote, in late November 2013, Ukrainians took to the streets in peaceful protest after then-President Viktor Yanukovych chose not to sign an agreement that would have integrated the country more closely with the European Union. The International Renaissance Foundation, part of the Open Society family of foundations, has supported civil society in Ukraine since 1990. For 25 years, the International Renaissance Foundation has worked with civil society organizations defending human rights and justice, tackling corruption, supporting Ukrainian minorities, including Tatars and Roma, pursuing health and education reform, and helping to facilitate Ukraine's European integration. The International Renaissance Foundation played an important role supporting civil society during the Euromaidan protests. The foundation ensured that legal aid was made available throughout the crisis to civic activists, protesters, and journalists. supplied victims of violence with medical care, enabled civil society solidarity and organization, supported channels like Kromskadska TV and Independent Live reporting about events on the Maidan, and documented cases of torture, beatings, and police and courts abuse from the Open Society Foundation, end quote. Here are the 4.
Okay, so before we actually have Patrick go through and read these 4 scenarios, I pulled back up the actual report, the tip report, and I'm kind of just perusing through this again, and this is just blowing my mind. I'm going to post this in the chat here, and you guys need to go through this sometime when you have a few minutes, because this is too perfect. Like, listen to some of this. The concept of election night is no longer accurate and is indeed dangerous. No, I'll even read the executive summary. In June 2020, the Transition Integrity Project convened a bipartisan group of over 100 current and former blah, blah, blah. The results of all 4 tabletop exercises were alarming. We assess with high degree of likelihood that November's elections will be marked by a chaotic legal and political landscape. I mean, and think about it. This is what you put out there when you're the ones that you know you're going to have to steal it, and you're trying to prepare for preventing that steal from being stifled, right? Like, this is what this is. This is the playbook. And wait till I get down to some of the end of this where they talk about the actions or the game plan that they need to have ready to go. We also assess the president is likely to contest the result by both legal and extra legal means in an attempt to hold on to power. Recent events, including the president's own unwillingness to commit to abiding by the results of the election, the Attorney General's embrace of president's groundless electoral fraud claims, and the unprecedented deployment of federal agents to put down left-wing protests underscore the extreme lengths to which President Trump may be willing to go in order to stay in office. Anyway, the concept of election night is no longer accurate and is indeed dangerous. It's saying the winner may not, and we access lightly, will not be known on election night as officials count mail-in ballots. They've already promised this again for 2024. A determined campaign has opportunity to contest the election into January 2021. And this is where, to me, this is like, were they already planning to do some shit on January 6th? Because President Trump, the incumbent, will very likely use the executive branch to aid his campaign strategy, including through the Department of Justice. We assess there is a chance the president will attempt to convince legislatures or governors to take action, including illegal actions, to defy the popular vote. Federal laws provide little guidance of how Congress should resolve these irregularities when they convene in a joint session on January 6th. A particular concern is how the military would respond in the context of uncertain election results. And this is something they're still scared about. That War Game documentary, which hasn't been released publicly. I haven't watched it yet, but I will before one of these power hours. They're scared of that. That's one of the things they've said is what happens if, this election and part of the military isn't on board with the results. And then the administrative transition process itself may be disrupted. And then it goes into, this is what the recommendations are: plan for a contested election, because they're going to steal it. Trump's obviously not going to be okay with it. Focus on readiness in states providing political support for a complete and accurate count. Address the 2 biggest threats head on: lies about voter fraud and escalating violence. And anticipate a rocky transition. And then let me go down to, there's this part here. Key insights. They give like, okay, right here. During the exercises, Team Biden and Democratic elected officials took the following steps. So these are like the recommendations. And think back to 2020. This is almost exactly what happened. Organizing 1,000 influencers to denounce efforts to steal the election. They still have this going on. Organizing all living presidents to stand with Biden and denounce Trump administration efforts to subvert the democratic process. Check. Recruiting moderate Republican governors such as Baker or Hogan to form an election protection coalition. I don't know if they got both those. They might have got Hogan. I don't know. But they think like Liz Cheney and Kinzinger. That's part of their election protection coalition. Working with local Democratic elected officials to call on the Adjunct General of the National Guard, along with representatives from the technology sector, to monitor vote counting. What? Organizing a bipartisan National Day of Restoration of Democracy and a National Day of Unity, both including faith leaders, and attempting a Capitol strike and a work stoppage as part of an overall effort to push corporate leaders to insist that all ballots be counted. I mean, this is just insane. A show of numbers in the streets and actions in the streets may be decisive factors in determining what the public perceives as a just and legitimate outcome. What the public perceives. I mean, right here, they're talking about like it doesn't have to be what they actually want, but if enough people are in the streets, the public will be like, okay, well, yep, I guess I believe that this is what people want. And that's why it's so interesting coming into this upcoming election. You guys aren't going to like this thought, but we've been kicking back and forth, in some private group chats with Badlanders, like, how is this election going to unfold? And the truth is, none of us actually know. And that's why one of these power hours, we're going to do a full, like, let's game out every scenario we can think of, how it might play out. Do we think it's likely? All this stuff, whatever. And one of the things that like keeps coming back up in my mind is, okay, if this goes beyond January 20th, 2025, I mean, that's bad juju. I don't think it can go beyond that. Like, I don't think the people will accept that. And I've said for a long time, I think that's what Trump's trying to avoid, is like any sort of escalatory violence that could lead to some sort of civil war. I don't think he's going to let it get that far. But what if he wants to get it like right to the cusp of that? What if it actually does go beyond? Like, what if they install Kamala on 1/20/2025? Like, the protests that would take place after that, I cannot imagine. But anyway, I'll keep going with this article. I just thought this is fascinating. We're going to go through the actual war game scenarios here. So totally biased, but this is such a fascinating report.
Scenarios that were war-gamed by the Transition Integrity Project. Game 1. Ambiguous. The first game investigated a scenario in which the outcome of the election remained unclear from election night and throughout gameplay. The results from 3 states are in contention, and ballots are destroyed in one of the states, making it unclear who should have won that state. Neither campaign is willing to concede. Game 2. Clear Biden victory. Biden wins both the Electoral College, the popular vote. Trump alleges fraud and takes steps to benefit himself and his family, but ultimately hands the White House over to Biden.
Real quick, I saw somebody in the chat say, what is the war game documentary he's talking about? I'll show you this here. This is go to home. So War Game, it's this documentary that was put out. A lot of the people that are involved in this were like in the Transition and Integrity Project. Like, it's the same people. But I'll read the description here. War Game sweeps audiences into an elaborate future set simulation that dramatically escalates the threat posed by the January 6, 2021 insurrection. The film follows a bipartisan group of U.S. defense intelligence and elected policymakers spanning 5 presidential administrations as they participate in an unscripted role-play exercise. I mean, this kind of sounds like the tip report right here, like the war gaming exercise that they're doing. Portraying a fictional president of the United States and his advisors, they confront a political coup backed by rogue members of the U.S. military in the wake of a contested 2024 presidential election. Like actors in a thriller, but with profound real-world stakes, the players have only 6 hours to save American democracy. The simulation's outcome hinges on several inflection points, from the government's capacity to counter the disinformation that's effectively spread by the insurgent side to the potential invocation of the Insurrection Act, i.e. the nuclear option. While the exercise served to stress test our institutions, the film is a critical wake-up call underscoring the urgent need for bipartisanship in safeguarding American democracy. So yeah, this is out now in like some theaters around the country, but it's also going to be streaming starting September 27th. So I'm probably just going to wait till it comes out on streaming, and I'll watch it. I'll watch it then, and then we'll discuss it. Maybe we can even do a screening. I don't know if we'll get in trouble for that. Do a screening on Badlands to discuss it. But anyway, back to the tip report. So far we got game 1, ambiguous. The first game investigated a scenario in which the outcome of the election remained unclear. Neither campaign willing to concede, whatever. This is probably for them worst case scenario, because I mean that's kind of essentially what happened, but they put that in there to make it seem like they were objective, but like ambiguous, and then the clear Trump win somehow still ends up with Biden the victor. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, okay, game 1, we don't know who won, and then neither campaign is willing to concede. Who knows what happens? But then every other game here, Biden ends up there, even the clear Trump win, which is fascinating to me.
Game 3, clear Trump win. The third scenario started with an Electoral College victory for President Trump, 286 to 252. but a popular vote win, 52-47, for former Vice President Biden. In this scenario, Biden refused to concede, convinced the Democratic governors of 2 states that Trump won to send separate slates of electors to the Electoral College, encouraged 3 states to threaten secession, and convinced the House of Representatives to refuse to certify the election and declare Biden the victor. Game.
And so what's funny about this is they had this group of lawmakers and all these people, 67 people involved in this game scenario. And one of the scenarios, they had Biden convincing the Democratic governors to send a separate slate of electors and then have the House of Representatives refuse to certify the election and then declare Biden the victor, which ironically is something they ended up persecuting Trump for like very recently. But they were wargaming that and like, this is one of our options that we can do. And so is it possible like this was bait to try to get some of Trump's people to do that very thing so they could later persecute him? I don't know, but it's interesting to me that they included that scenario in here and it ended up being what they went after Trump for.
4. Narrow Biden win. The final scenario explored a narrow Biden win where he leads with less than 1% of the popular vote and has a slim lead at 278 electoral votes. The Trump campaign sows chaos, but Senate Republicans and the Joint Chiefs of Staff eventually signal that they accept Biden's win. Trump refuses to leave and is removed by the Secret Service.
This is also an interesting one here too, because they include the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Like, yeah, it's one thing to have Republicans involved, but then the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they're like, but the military says Biden won, so that's what finally got him to leave, and Secret Service abided by that. The Joint Chiefs of Staff is purely an advisory group. They have no say in what the military actually does. They just advise the president. The actual like meat and bones of what the military does is done by the Secretary of Defense and the combatant commanders, and then on the way down the chain of command. They are not in the chain of command, but it's interesting they included them here. So I wonder if that was a hint that Milley maybe is a bad guy. I don't know.
In August 2020, TIP, Transition Integrity Project, released a report outlining its findings and recommendations. The report stated, quote, "We assess that the President Trump is likely to contest the result by both legal and extra-legal means in an attempt to hold on to power. Recent events, including the president's own unwillingness to commit to abiding by the results of the election, the Attorney General's embrace of the president's groundless electoral fraud claims, and the unprecedented deployment of federal agents to put down left-wing protests, underscore the extreme lengths to which President Trump may be willing to go in order to stay in office," end quote. The report's intention was to inspire the necessary changes to ensure a fair election in 2020. Quote, "These risks can be mitigated. The worst outcomes of the exercises are far from a certainty. The purpose of this report is not to frighten, but to spur all stakeholders to action." The following screenshots are how Revolver News broke down and analyzed the Transition Integrity Project's report. Remember, the TIP report was released in August of 2020, well before the November 3rd election. Compare this to what actually unfolded during the 2020 election. Quote, "Now that we are armed with the color revolution framework and the specific role that electoral legitimacy plays in that model, we are in a strong position to evaluate the true agenda behind the Transition Integrity Project's war game scenario, suggesting that Trump won't concede the election. The title of Rosa Brooks's Washington Post piece is suggestive, prompting us to wonder whether it is a prediction or a threat. What's the worst that could happen? The election will likely spark violence and a constitutional crisis." Quote from the article, "A landslide for Joe Biden resulted in a relatively orderly transfer of power. Every other scenario we looked at involved street-level violence and political crisis. Translation: vote for Biden or else." The article continues, "Soon, Attorney General William P. Barr opens an investigation into unsubstantiated allegations of massive vote-by-mail fraud and ties between Democratic officials and Antifa. In Michigan and Wisconsin, where Biden has won the official vote and Democratic governors have certified slates of pro-Biden electors, the Trump campaign persuades Republican-controlled legislatures to send rival pro-Trump slates to Congress for the Electoral College vote." Translation: despite severe problems with mail-in voting, any effort by the Justice Department to ensure the integrity of a mass mail-in system will be interpreted in advance as part of an authoritarian coup on the part of Trump. In other words, if Trump takes any reasonable measures to prevent the color revolution coup against him, he will automatically be acting in an authoritarian manner, justifying said color revolution against him. Funny how that works, isn't it? Article continues. In every exercise, both teams sought to mobilize their supporters to take to the streets. Team Biden repeatedly called for peaceful protests, while Team Trump encouraged provocateurs to incite violence, then used the resulting chaos to justify sending federalized guard units or active duty military personnel into American cities to restore order. Translation: no matter how violent these peaceful protests become, any effort by Trump to establish authority will be used to confirm the predetermined conclusion that he is an authoritarian and that extraordinary measures must be taken to remove him from office. Back to the article. Social media platforms can commit to protecting the democratic process by rapidly removing or correcting false statements spread by foreign or domestic disinformation campaigns, and by ensuring that their platforms aren't used to incite or plan violence. Translation: social media must be fully censored leading up to the election. Facebook is already doing its part, for instance, by aggressively censoring any mention of Kyle Rittenhouse that suggests he acted in self-defense. He did.
This is one of the things that has this changed enough to thwart what they're going to try to do in 2024? Have we gotten enough control of the social media platforms just by having Twitter back? Because we really don't have YouTube. We don't have pretty much anything else. But we have Rumble's gotten much bigger, and we have Twitter. But we don't have much of anything else. So I don't know.
From the article: when people unite to demand democracy and the rule of law, even repressive regimes can be stopped in their tracks. Trump's is a repressive regime, and therefore extraordinary measures, usually reserved for repressive regimes overseas, namely in color revolutions, are justified to prevent him from taking office. Note that this sentiment was echoed explicitly in a similar roundtable discussion on the election done by the New York Times a little over a week ago. One of the contributors, Jamel Bowie, spelled it out quite explicitly. Quote, "I think the Democratic Party and its affiliated institutions and organizations need to be prepping basically a defense of ballot counting, sort of a nationwide effort to stop that tampering. I think there needs to be plans for protests and demonstrations. This is going to sound very hyperbolic, but I think that we have to think of the task of getting Trump out as less of a traditional democratic transition and more of something akin to pushing an authoritarian regime out."
And just to show you again, the Time magazine, the plan that fortified the election, they had those protests ready to go.
One does not vote out an authoritarian regime, or they are not authoritarian. Dictatorships are only overthrown, and Bowie's statement is an explicit call to do exactly that. The actually peaceful process of voting must be supplemented or supplanted with mostly peaceful protests if the result isn't correct. Which leads us to the next passage from Rosa Brooks. Quote, "Mass mobilization is no guarantee that our democracy will survive. But if things go as badly as our exercises suggest they might, a sustained, nonviolent protest movement may be America's best and final hope." Translation: just in case Biden isn't able to win fair and square, they have introduced a mail-in voting system that dramatically increases the likelihood of some type of contested election scenario. If that occurs, the outcome of the election will no longer be in the realm of democratic choice, where perhaps the forces against Trump have a disadvantage. Instead, the election becomes an issue of sustained mass mobilization of demonstrators, capitalizing on every opportunity for escalation, a full court press by media demonizing every effort by Trump to restore order as authoritarian, and a transmission of the electoral process to court battles which disadvantage Trump. There is, of course, one scenario, a very dark one, that remains unexplored. If the color revolution against Trump frames him as an authoritarian unwilling to leave office, the only alternative is to remove him by force. Both Al Gore and Joe Biden have already taken the extremely irresponsible and dangerous step of floating a military role in removing Trump should their color revolution not turn out the way they plan. Quote, "If Trump lost the election but refused to accept the results, Gore said he believes the military would intervene. He noted that under the parameters of the Constitution, Trump's last day in office is January 20th, 2021, end quote." So they're setting things up in such a way as to almost ensure that a clear winner will not exist on election day, and framing any refusal of President Trump to concede as grounds for military removal. This final stage of the color revolution is something that Rosa Brooks of the Transition Integrity Project has entertained for quite some time. The following excerpt is from a piece Rosa Brooks wrote shortly after the 2016 election, suggesting a fourth way to remove Trump from office before 2020. Quote, The fourth possibility is one that until recently I would have said was unthinkable in the United States of America: a military coup, or at least a refusal by military leaders to obey certain orders, end quote. And this is how the color revolution operation against Trump, and by extension against all of his supporters, evidently concludes.
It's funny to me that that fourth option that they're talking about here, this military coup where they, disobey orders, is like the fact that that is potentially going to come around and bite them in the ass here in 2024. Like they were kind of begging for it, like as a last resort in 2020, but now they're decrying it and like being like, oh my gosh, if this were to happen, we're in trouble. Like, don't do this. What happens if it happens? It's the whole war game scenario thing, that the documentary. It's kind of funny how it's reversed. They're so scared, guys. They know they're effed here.
With the possibility of a military coup. After 2016, a critical mass of ruling class factions in the national security apparatus, state bureaucracies, big tech, and media decided that they would never allow the American people to meddle in their own elections again. And as a result of this contempt for the will of the people, our country is closer to an existential crisis than it has been at any period since the Civil War. Back to Patel. You can clearly see a picture emerging that the report released by
yes, people in the chat are saying that did happen when military leaders telling China they wouldn't obey presidential orders from Trump. Yeah, that was Milley. The story is Milley reached out to his counterpart in China and said, yeah, we won't obey orders. But honestly, again, Milley is no part and has no place in the chain of command. I personally, I'm much more unsure now than I was at the beginning. When I first started writing the series, I was like, Milley, I believe, would have to be a white hat for how things, I believe, went down with devolution. I'm not as confident in that as I was then. I'm totally unsure. I could see it going either way. But regardless, in terms of him reaching out to China and being like, yeah, we won't do this thing, it's honestly irrelevant. Like, he's an advisor. He's not in the chain of command. I know people say that he has sway with his branch, the Army, or was it Army or Navy? I can't remember. But it's irrelevant. Like, if our military does follow the chain of command, he has nothing to do with it. And if Trump were to give some sort of order, maybe like an order of continuity of government or chain, whatever, they would follow it, in my opinion, having not served in the military. So maybe my opinion doesn't mean much on that.
The Transition Integrity Project wasn't just some wargaming by political figures. This was right out of the playbook they used to steal the 2020 election, and they put it out there for the world to see. Why would they do that? Here's what American Mind had to say, quote, so why are the Democrats publicly talking about the conspiracy? Because they know that for it to succeed, it must not look like a conspiracy. They need to plant the idea in the public mind now that their unlawful and illegitimate removal of President Trump from office will somehow be his fault. Never mind the pesky detail that the president would refuse to leave, only if he were convinced he legitimately won. Remember, Biden should not concede under any circumstances. And
that's so true. That's such a good point. And this is what they do with everything. In order for this stuff to concede, it can't come out of nowhere. They need to seed the public mind with the idea well before it happens. They do this all the damn time. But yeah, that last point where the president would only leave if he was convinced, or he only refused to leave if he was convinced he legitimately won. But Biden was told never to concede. Like, they told Biden repeatedly, don't concede under any circumstances. But they decry Trump because he still to this day says, I never conceded.
quote, this is how the fake news works. Think of the Russia hoax. The political establishment fabricated evidence of Russia, fed it to their puppets in the fake mainstream media. And those stories were then used, fake stories in the mainstream media were then used to justify further investigation, therefore, quote unquote, legitimizing the whole thing. They plant stories to create a narrative to create their desired result. From American Mind, quote, the second part of the plan is either to produce enough harvested ballots, lawfully or not, to tip close states, or else dispute the results in close states and insist, no matter what the tally says, that Biden won them. The worst case scenario for the country, but not for the ruling class, would be results in a handful of states that are so ambiguous and hotly disputed that no one can rightly say who won. Of course, that will not stop the Democrats from insisting that they won. The public preparation for that has also already begun. Streams of stories and social media posts explaining how, while on election night it might look as if Trump won, close states will tip to Biden as all the mail-in ballots are quote unquote counted. The third piece is to get the vast and loud Dem-left propaganda machine ready for war. That leaked report exhorted Democrats to identify, quote, key influencers in the media and among local activists who can affect political perceptions and mobilize political actions, who could establish pre-commitments to playing a constructive role in event of a contested election, i.e., in blaring from every rooftop that Trump lost. Try to think of this from Trump's point of view. Trump and his team are not stupid. They knew exactly what was happening. The TIP report sent a clear message that even if Trump wins the election, the political establishment would sow chaos and turmoil for as long as it took until Trump was removed from office. I've said before that Trump had a choice to make leading up to January 20th, 2021. He could either reveal the fraud and remain in office or walk away. What would have happened if Trump made the moves to prevent Joe Biden from taking office? The report from the Transition Integrity Project gave us the answer. There would have been violence in the streets. With tensions as high as they were, we would have had a civil war in our country, the exact type of brief civil war where civilians actually die, and Trump would have been forced to act. This would have placed him squarely in a situation where he would undoubtedly be condemned no matter how he responded. That's how color revolutions work. Trump really only had one option to save the country from that turmoil. He had to walk away in order to save lives.
Okay. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So this next part, it goes through a lot of the dig on like the funding stuff behind here. And it's a good dig. And I encourage you to just go there and read it. But I want to skip ahead to the part where I go through an executive order and specifically talk about George Soros and like this foreign aspect. Because this is a discussion that it's really at the center of devolution. Like the foreign aspect involved in our elections, it being an act of war, is like the basis for the devolution series, right? Foreign election interference, as Trump said just last night. So I want to go through this and talk about it. So let me go to share this screen. Here we go.
So how could Trump possibly go about defeating the political establishment, specifically a character like George Soros, who has been successfully influencing United States politics for years while carefully avoiding crossing the line into prosecutable interference? My initial thought process led me to re-examine Executive Order 13848, imposing certain sanctions in the event of foreign interference in a United States election. I have covered this executive order extensively in previous articles, but up until this point, I have been looking at this executive order specifically at the cyber aspect of altering the vote count. For the record, I am still convinced that the military has evidence of direct foreign interference in the cyber arena, and that is all they would need to justify devolution as a continuity of government plan. But there is more to Executive Order 13848, and it is worth examining, if only to serve as a thought experiment from the order of September 12, 2018, imposing certain sanctions in the event of foreign interference in a United States election. By the authority.
Okay, so right off the bat, I want to talk about this. So I say, my initial thought process led me to re-examine EO 13848. Up until this point, I'd been looking at this EO specifically at the cyber aspect of altering the vote count. What's actually interesting about this executive order, and this is one of the things that my understanding of it initially has changed, because I've read it multiple times and I've read other things surrounding this executive order and other executive orders. This executive order doesn't actually cover the altering of vote counts. Like, I know that's crazy to think about, but it doesn't. Like, in my opinion, if there's actual manipulation with the voting machines, like, okay, it does cover it in a sense, but most of what they're talking about here is the propaganda stuff. Like it says right here, to undermine public confidence in the elections, by unauthorized accessing of election and campaign infrastructure. That's the part right there that technically could cover the actual machines. But the covert distribution of propaganda and disinformation, that is primarily what this executive order has been used for sanction stuff. That and like campaign things, like hacking Trump's campaign emails and distributing that. Like that's interference by the book, by the definition of this. Where I think the cyber aspect and actual like getting into the machines and stuff, I don't think that's specifically covered by any executive orders because it doesn't need to be, because that is an act of war. Does that make sense? So like that piece of this, like this is the public part, and honestly, over time now, like the more that goes on, and the more I'm seeing the reports from the intelligence community that are required by this executive order, I think that was Trump's purpose with this. Like the reason for this is to get the intelligence community to come out and have to report on who's trying to interfere in our elections every couple months. Like they put out these status updates, and then the big reports are due within 45 days and 90 days of each election. And part of me is like, I wonder if that's what Trump is doing here. They did it in 2017 after the 2016 election, and it wasn't required, but they wanted to put that out there to get that narrative out there of all this Russian interference. And I think Trump wanted these narratives to keep coming out. And in a big way, it's been in opposition to him. But I think that's the primary point. The actual manipulation of the machines, which I do believe takes place, is covered through presidential powers and an act of war, because our election infrastructure is critical infrastructure, a move that was done by Jay Johnson from Obama's administration. Let me keep going here.
Vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, including the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, 50 United States Code, Section 1701, IEEPA, the National Emergencies Act, 50 United States Code 1601, NEA, Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, 8 United States Code 1182, and Section 301 of Title III United States Code. I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, find that the ability of persons located in whole or in substantial part outside the United States to interfere in or undermine public confidence in United States elections, including through the unauthorized accessing of election and campaign infrastructure or the covert distribution of propaganda and disinformation, constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. Although there has been no evidence of a foreign power altering the outcome or vote tabulation in any United States election, foreign powers have historically sought to exploit America's free and open political system. In recent years, the proliferation of digital devices and internet-based communications has created significant vulnerabilities and magnified the scope and intensity of the threat of foreign interference, as illustrated in the 2017 Intelligence Community Assessment. I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with this threat.
And that's interesting to me, because in this executive order that Trump created, I mean, you know, I'm sure it was his aides or somebody in his circle that wrote it, but he signed it and put it into law, essentially. It says, although there has been no evidence of a foreign power altering the outcome or vote tabulation in any United States elections. And that's the part of this that I keep coming back to, thinking, like, why would he say that in here when he knows this is what they do? Like back in 2012, there's that tweet during the Romney-Obama election, and he's saying, like, watch the machines, vote flipping, whatever. Like, he specifically calls out the machines. He knows this happens. But so why did he put that in here? And I think it's because that's not the point of this executive order. But the threat of foreign interference, based on the 2017 Intelligence Community Assessment, which is what they used to basically further the narrative that Russia interfered in the election on behalf of Trump, that's what this is about. He wanted that stuff to continually come out into the surface. And it almost makes me wonder if that's leading up to what happened here in 2024, where I don't think we've had any actual Russian interference in as it relates to what happened in 2017, 2016. But Iran has done that. Iran actually hacked, or we're told they hacked Trump's emails and then tried to get into the Biden campaign and the media. The same thing they said happened in 2016, 2017, but we have not had the same reaction. I wonder if that's the point.
End quote. Executive Order 13848 mentions interfering or undermining public confidence in United States elections through, quote, the covert distribution of propaganda and disinformation. The EO then goes on to give us some important definitions, including foreign interference with respect to an election, as well as what constitutes a foreign government. Back to the order. Quote, Section 8. For the purposes of this order, A, the term person means an individual or entity. B, the term entity means a partnership, association, trust, joint venture, corporation, group, subgroup, or other organization. C, the term United States person means any United States citizen, permanent resident alien, entity organized under the laws of the United States or any jurisdiction within the United States, including foreign branches, or any person, including a foreign person in the United States. D, the term election infrastructure means information and communications technology and systems used by or on behalf of the federal government or a state or local government in managing the election process, including voter registration databases, voting machines, voting tabulation equipment, and equipment for the secure transmission of election results. And E, the term United States election means any election for federal office held on or after the date of this order. F, the term foreign interference with respect to an election includes any covert, fraudulent, deceptive, or unlawful actions or attempted actions of a foreign government or of any person acting as an agent of or on behalf of a foreign government undertaken with the purpose or effect of influencing, undermining confidence in, or altering the result or reported result of the election, or undermining public confidence in election processes or institutions. G, the term foreign government means any national, state, provincial, or other governing authority, any political party, or any official of any governing authority or political party, in each case of a country other than the United States. H, the term covert with respect to an action or attempted action means characterized by an intent or apparent intent that the role of a foreign government will not be apparent or acknowledged publicly. And I, the term state means the several states or any of the territories, dependencies, or possessions of the United States, end quote. Does the Transition Integrity Project report fit the definition of foreign interference? I think it could be considered a deceptive action undertaken with the purpose or effect of influencing and or undermining public confidence in election processes or institutions. But the foreign aspect is a tough one to definitively nail down. Nils Gilman, co-founder of the TIP, has ties to the CCP through the Berggruen Institute, but is that connection strong enough or direct enough? Section G. The term foreign government means any national, state, provincial, or other governing authority, any political party, or any official of any governing authority or political party, in each case of a country other than the United States. The mentioning of political party certainly is interesting. Could George Soros and his Open Society fit that definition? Could the lawsuits that illegally changed election laws be considered foreign interference? I'm not sure it's possible to legally make those connections, but it is definitely interesting to ponder. Close.
You know what? Where I think this goes is it's the acting on behalf of a foreign government, and I don't want to get into like the whole Israel stuff. I just won't. But how many people in the United States, like in the media or in our government, have dual citizenship? Maybe it's that. Like you can look at this so many different ways. But honestly, like again, as I said before, I don't think this is the executive order that is meant to be used as like the takedown and the executive order that will take down like the deep state via our election system. You know what I mean? Like we're going to catch them cheating because of 13848, and because of 13848, we can do all these things. That's not what I don't think that's what this executive order is. I think whatever Trump did in 2020, and who knows, leading into devolution and what we're about to see in 2024, I don't think we've actually seen that. I don't think it's public. I think it was done because of an act of war, of any foreign involvement or anybody else involved, whatever. And it's got to be in the PEDs, the approximately, 56 PEDs that exist. That's where it's at. So I don't know. I mean, the executive order 13848, my thought process has definitely changed. I think it's much more about the narrative and those reports than it is about actually catching election interference in our elections. Still an important thing, and still very interesting that the Biden administration keeps continuing this, for sure. But as I've said for a long time, it doesn't do what so many people attribute this executive order as doing, which has gotten me to wonder, like, what is the purpose of it? And I don't know if I've got it nailed down, but that's where my mind's at right now.
clearly. The same people from our own government who have implemented color revolutions abroad have also attempted to implement one here as well. When you look at Trump's presidency from a 40,000-foot view, the massive scope of the swamp comes into focus. This is how one begins to see the picture of what Trump was up against. Every single move made by the political establishment from before Trump took office up until they stole the presidency for Joe Biden, and the subsequent events that have unfolded during Biden's time in office have all been part of the playbook. Everything from Spygate to the Transition Integrity Project to current events, they are all clearly connected. Devolution is just one aspect of Trump's plan to save America. Trump knew well before taking office how corrupt and entrenched the political establishment is. How do you defeat an enemy like that? How do you destroy it so it never returns? It's one thing to cut the head off, but how do you make sure another doesn't grow in its place? In order to obtain a total victory, you must first arm yourself with the proper weapons with which to do battle. Buckle up. In my next installment, I'll be discussing Trump's weapon of choice. Executive Order 13818, blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption. The best is yet to come.
And then, so I published this, I wrote it, and then it was like shortly after this. And what was the date of this article? October of 2021. Yeah, so shortly after this, I went to that Patriot Double Down in Vegas, the first time publicly speaking at a conference. Oh man, thinking back about that, I like blacked out. The whole thing was crazy. And thinking how far it's come since then. But anyway, when you go to my article now, it's like one of the few edits I've ever done. I put this in because originally that was my intent, is to go into 13818, and ended up doing that later in the series. But while I was in Vegas preparing for my speech that I was going to give, or my presentation, whatever, that's when it clicked for me how important 13961 was. And so that's why part 13 is about this executive order, 13961, on December 7th, one of the most important executive orders in the series. And that is what we're going to cover next on the recap series, probably next Tuesday. So yeah, make sure you guys tune into that one. I'll try to promo that one a little better too, because that'll be such a fun one to go back through. It's going to be a long one. That's what she said, but it'll be good. So yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. Here in about 40 minutes, Patrick is going to be reading Joe Lang's latest piece, which, as I said, Patrick says, let me quote this one more time. Patrick said, I think this last column literally proved Q is 100% real and 99.9% has already won. I'm going to try to be there to listen in as well. I do have to go pick up my kids, but yeah, make sure you guys tune in for that. Also hit that thumbs up. And then also one more time, thanks again to Jeff Pedigo, City Zoo. Make sure you guys get your copy. You will love this book. If you've been following along to what's been going on, if you're awake at all, the metaphors used in this book, it's just so funny and so spot on. Badlandsmedia.tv/CityZoo. Thank you, Jeff, for continuing to sponsor the stream. Yeah, and we'll see you tomorrow. Actually, I probably won't be doing. I don't know if I'm doing Liberty Den tomorrow or not, but if not, you'll for sure see me Saturday on the Power Hour. So catch y'all later.